Canon have just launched the R1 and the R5 II. Now if you head over to our channel you can watch our R5 II review, but today we're tackling the R1 and I am so excited about this camera. Some of the specs are incredible, especially if you're shooting news and sports. So first of all, let's cover our top line specs. So we have a 24.2 megapixel sensor, which is the perfect compromise between low light capability and being able to print off large scale images. So again, that's great if you're not sure which scenario you'll be in or you shoot in lots of scenarios. It's a back illuminated sensor, which we've come to know and love from Canon. But the spec I'm really excited about is the dual processor. So usually in our Canon cameras we see one processor, and in this camera we have two that work in harmony. So we have the Digic accelerator and the accelerated capture processor that work together. What that means is it's using AI or deep learning to do certain functions within the camera, which we're going to come on to later. But one of the incredible functions is that within the camera it can upscale and reduce noise to create an image that's 4 times the size of the megapixels we have already, meaning you can get a 96 megapixel image, or on the R5 II, 180 megapixel image without having to take 4 photos and stitching them together. When it comes to IBIS, we have 8.5 stops, which is fantastic, especially when partnered with R series lenses, because they also have their own stabilization built in. If you're upgrading from a 1DX, which is the predecessor to this camera, rather than the R3, you will notice quite a big difference there. Let's talk about speed though, because with that processor and that sensor comes a big question about how fast this camera will be, especially if you're shooting sports. Now, obviously the Euros have just finished, we've got Wimbledon, we've also got the Olympics coming up. That's going to be a question that a lot of people want to ask. And the great thing about this camera is that it is faster than ever, with 40 frames per second in electronic burst mode, and it's customizable so that if you do want to customize that all the way down to 1 second, you have the option of 30 frames, 20 frames, 10 frames, 5, 4, 3, 2 and 1. In the R5 II, however, that's 30 frames maximum, so this is a full 10 frames per second faster than that camera as well. And when it comes to speed, it's not just that burst mode that gives you that extra advantage, it also shoots 1/64,000th of a second. There's almost nothing that moves fast enough for you to miss it. And it doesn't stop there, because they've also increased what you can do with pre-burst, which is now 20 frames per second. So if you half press the shutter before you take that photograph, it will give you 20 extra frames before you pressed it. And if you're like me and horrible at photographing sports, as you'll see on the screen, that's very beneficial. And if you are shooting sports photography, they've also minimized the rolling shutter. And so if you're doing panning shots or you're shooting something like basketball that's more fast paced and you're moving, you will see the difference there. As per other Canon cameras, we have 15 plus stops of dynamic range, which is fantastic because as you'll see on the screen, we were shooting in quite a contrasting environment with our breakdancers, with bright lights and darkness coming in from different angles at different times. Now, in terms of video, we've come to know Canon for having quite high video specs and resolutions, and that hasn't changed. So we have 6K ProRes RAW, which is 12-bit recording, and that's in 60 frames per second. And that means that you have a good flexibility with your color grading. We also have 4K 120p, which is 10-bit. We have 4K 60p, which is oversampled from 6K, so that gives you the higher pixel quality. And when you're shooting in 4K, you have the option between DCI and UHD. One thing I really like about shooting with this camera is that you have C-Log 2 and C-Log 3 available. Now, there are other modes you can use in the recording menu, but what was interesting was that it was quite difficult to find C-Log. So it's actually hidden in custom function modes, and then you have to go into those modes and turn it on manually through there. So if you're not sure where it is, that's something we struggled with too. And of course, we then have my all-time favorite thing that a camera brand has launched. Now, I've tested hundreds of cameras and they've all been really wonderful. I pretty much love every camera we've tested recently. But in the R1 and the R5 II, there is this ability to shoot photo and video at the same time. Now, what that means is that whilst you're recording a 2K video file, you can press the shutter button and take stills as you go. So if you're an individual content creator, or you're trying to capture both for social media, or you're a journalist working on multiple projects at once, you can press the shutter and get the same resolution still, without having to turn off your recording or interrupt your feed. The only downside to that is it only goes up to 2K. So what that means is that you're not going to be able to get the highest resolution in video, and it does it in proxy recording, so you need both memory card slots filled. And on the R1, both memory card slots are CF Express, so that means you would need 2 CF Express cards within that camera. So interestingly, the R1 shares a lot of its key audio features with the C400. For example, we have 4-channel audio recording. Now standard in a lot of cameras is 2, which means you have left and right stereo, but in 4-channel recording, it just gives you that extra flexibility. Now, when it comes to its predecessor, the R3, we have 16-bit recording. In this camera, we have 24-bit recording. That just gives you a bigger dynamic range with regards to audio. With the R1, the real star of the show is autofocus, and it's that dual processor deep learning that gives us that extra functionality. So in a typical camera, all of your AF points are set up horizontally. In this camera, we have a cross AF sensor, and what that means is that there are horizontal points of focus and vertical points of focus. So when they created the sensor, they've 3D printed all of the horizontal lines, and then, unlike usual, they stopped the process, rotated the sensor and printed vertical lines. And so that gives you the same functionality in your AF, whether you're shooting vertically or horizontally. And what that means is that you can shoot for Instagram if you're a news creator or a content creator without losing any of the functions that the AF provides. But let's talk about those points, because I have never seen a number this high in a camera before. So we have 4,368 points of focus. You did not mishear me, and that is incredible. We also have 9.44 billion dots of EVF, which is a massive improvement from the R3 that had just under 6 billion. So you can really see how much they've pushed the limits of this camera. And the AF works down to -7.5 EV, which is incredibly dark, so it really means you can push the boat out there regardless of what shooting scenario you're in. Then we have dual pixel intelligent AF. Now, this is a function that I don't think we've seen in any camera before. In fact, I'm pretty sure we haven't, and I really enjoyed using it. It's actually insane to think about how AI and deep learning can improve the way that we photograph. Now, if you asked me a few years ago, I would have said, absolutely not, I want nothing to do with AI. But now I might have changed my mind. So with this camera and with the R5 II, you can set up to 10 people's faces in camera to recognize who is playing the sport that you're shooting, and you can prioritize them from 1 to 10. So you can have the most important player as your priority 1. On top of that, the deep learning can then be processed to look at the ball and decide what action is happening next in the frame. So when we were shooting basketball, as you'll see on the screen, somebody jumped up to go and shoot the ball into the hoop, and out of nowhere, without me realizing it was happening, somebody came in to dunk the ball. The camera was able to understand and predict that that can happen in basketball and switch the focus to the person that I didn't see, meaning you're probably never going to miss a shot again, even if you did miss it. The only downside of this functionality is we were in Munich during the Euros. Now, I didn't know this because I'm not a big football fan, but it turns out there are 11 people in a Euros team. Not ideal. And the second problem with that is that you do have to program those faces into your camera, which is obviously quite difficult if you're not part of the press team and you don't have prior access. One thing I did notice is that the viewfinder is significantly bigger, and that's intentional for their enhanced Eye AF. Now you might be thinking, Tiffany, every camera can track eyes, but it's not their eyes it's tracking, it's yours. So whilst I was shooting, the camera is able to take a look at my eye and see where I'm looking in the frame and focus based on that. So that also gives you a bit of an advantage when you're shooting. Now finally, let's talk about the body before I tell you how I got on with the camera. So in terms of body, it's 1115 grams, and that's with the battery and the cards in it, which I think is not bad for a camera of this size and for the functionality that you get from these bigger cameras from Canon and their 1 series cameras built for press, news and sports. In terms of memory cards, we have 2 CF Express cards. Now, personally, I quite like having an SD card. It's inexpensive, but with the proxy shooting, you can understand why they've chosen to have those 2 CF Express cards, especially when you look at who this camera is built for, which tends to be professionals looking at sports and news. Regarding the body, this is quite a controversial point. I did not like the button placement, but if you are using a 1DX3, it is exactly the same as that camera, including the built-in grip. The built-in grip gives you the ability to shoot longer periods of time without overheating. But if you're used to using the R3, the button system is more like cameras like the R5, and so you're not quite used to where they are. That being said, you would get used to it eventually. It's just we only had a day with it and it made it difficult for me to try and use. The screen is fully articulating, which I would come to expect from Canon, and I loved it. I always hate being cordoned in by my screen, especially when we're shooting breakdancers and we're lying on the floor. Finally, what did I think about using the camera? Do you know what? Usually I would always say that I think a lot of these cameras have good and bad points, but I actually really enjoyed using it, probably more than a lot of cameras I've used previously, and I think it's that AF and the deep learning. It just made it so much easier to photograph a sport when you don't really photograph sports often. So if you were looking at getting into something like basketball shooting, Wimbledon, or even just going to the Olympics as a spectator, this camera has dramatically improved the way that you shoot. And if you're in journalism or news and you shoot so many different topics, the camera's doing a lot of the work for you, and I found that really impressive. And whilst a lot of these functionalities are often listed as things the camera can do, we don't always find that they work as well as they should. And actually in this situation, it probably worked better than I expected, quite significantly so, as you can see from the pictures on the screen, considering that I have absolutely no idea how to shoot a basketball game. Overall, I think the really interesting thing here is that were we expecting a camera to come out that used AI to its advantage? To be honest, no. I was really dead set against it, and it's a really great way to bridge the gap between AI and photography as a whole. You're probably wondering how much this camera sets you back, and I have to admit it isn't a cheap camera, but if you're doing this sort of topic, it probably is worth the upgrade for you. So currently at the time of filming, it sits at 7099 and 99p. Do I think it's worth it? If you look at the R3 and you look at the 1DX3, the improvements on this camera are significant, and the AI and deep learning give you so much flexibility that you didn't have in previous cameras. Personally, I think it's one of my favourite systems to use. Canon are calling this their flagship, and I can 100% see why. But if this isn't the right camera for you, check out our R5 II video, because that camera also blew my mind and has a lot of the specs that this camera has, including the dual processor. If you're shooting wildlife or other topics, that might be the camera that you want to go with instead. But for now, thank you for watching and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next video.